we're going to look in a bit more detail at some of the linked fields, the lookup fields, and some of the formulas that we're using. And we will also look at the junction table, which is a key part of being able to track what yarn you've used on particular projects and keep track of the quantity remaining. So if I go first of all to one of my yarn in stash records, the first type of field we're going to look at and the type of formula that we're going to look at is called concatenation. So I'm using this a lot in the leading field on a lot of my records. So if I in fact go back to the grid view, you'll see in grid view that in all of my tables, the first column here is locked. It is, it always stays present even when you're scrolling through the other, or when you're scrolling through the other columns. And this field type, you can see here, if I go to customize field, it has this warning that it's the table's primary field. It cannot be hidden or moved. The name is meant to be a short, unique representation of each record in your table. So that could be quite, a pain to come up with, to come up with a naming convention, to constantly, keep the same naming, and it's quite useful to have a consistent way of doing this, especially if you're using it to look up other fields. And that's where concatenation can come in quite handy. So I have set this field to a formula type, and the formula is as follows. So concatenate is the formula instruction, and then it's going to take the text in the brand field, then it's going to put a hyphen, then it's going to take text in the base field, then it's going to put a hyphen, and then it's going to take finally the text in the colorway field. So what we get by this is we get, you can see here, we have handspun hyphen Spin City Idlewild hyphen Idlewild. Or we have here Fine Fish Yarns, Merino Nylon Sock, Figgy Pudding. So basically, whenever I add a new entry, as I fill in the brand, the base and the colorway, this field will autofill, joining those three items together. We have exactly the same in fibre name. So again, this one is a concatenate brand hyphen base hyphen colorway. So it works the same way. And in the project yarn, which is the junction table, we also have the same thing happening. So we have concatenate project hyphen yarn used. So that's quite a useful one if you just need to fill that unique name field, and you don't want to have to type every time. The concatenate formula to join together other fields, other data that you're entering in the field, can be quite useful. Next, we're going to look at the formula that I have in the yarn status field. So this is called a nested if function. It took a little bit of trial and error to get this working, but essentially what this does is it's going to look at these three criteria in order and return the result according to what matches. So first of all, it goes if the value in the remaining grams column is less than or equal to 4, then the yarn status is going to be all used. If that's not true, it will go if the remaining grams value is less than the total grams value, then the yarn status is partially used. And if neither of those things are true, it will say not used. So this is a little bit more of a complicated formula, but it does work, and it basically means that as soon as the value in remaining grams is less than the value in total grams, it will update the status for me to partially used. And as soon as the value in remaining grams is less than or equal to 4, which is just the number I've decided is, less than 4 grams, I tend to count as all used, because I'll just use that amount of yarn for waste yarn or leaders on spinning and things like that, then it will say all used. So it's automatically updating the yarn status for me based on usage. Next, we're going to look at a conditional lookup field. So in my needles, hooks, and cables tables, I have a columns which are the linked records, and that tells me, you know, any project that I've linked to this particular needle. But it doesn't tell me, this column doesn't tell me which of those projects might currently be active and if that needle is actually in use right now. So that's why I have this conditional lookup field. So it is going to look up the data in the used in column, and on the projects table field it will look up the name of the project. And I've got this toggle button on here that only includes linked records from the projects table that meet certain conditions, and the condition is where the status of the project is in progress. So now we'll look at some linked fields. So if we're on the queue table, the first linked fields we have is patterns. So here you can select the field type is linked to another record, and then you choose which table you want to link to. So in this case, I'm linking to my library. You can allow linking to multiple records if you want, but I think for most cases, or at least for the pattern, that doesn't need to be enabled because you're only going to be linking to one pattern per project usually. And then this is a lookup field, so the field type is lookup, and the configuration, it's going to look at what you've put in the pattern field on this table, and it's going to pull through the data from the corresponding designer field that belongs to that pattern from the library table. Yarn I'm using, again, this is linked to yarn in stash, so we link to another record, and the table I'm choosing is yarn in stash. And this time I do have allow linking to multiple records enabled, because obviously I will want quite often to be using more than one yarn in a project. And again, colorway is a lookup field, so it's going to look up based on the data that I have put in the yarn field on this table. It's going to go to the corresponding yarn entry in the yarn in stash table and pull through the data from the colorway field on that table. Craft and library and image, these are all doing the same thing as what we saw earlier with designer. So these are all lookup fields that, based on the pattern that I've linked, it will pull through the data from the pattern entry in my library. And pattern name is just, in this case, I haven't made it a concatenation field, I've just made it a free text field. Now, if we talk a little bit about the junction table, so essentially this is a way to link together two unique pieces of data so that you can then pull that through onto other tables. So what this is doing is very simple. So it's literally got a link to my projects and a link to yarn and stash. So this one, linked projects, and this one, linked to yarn and stash. And then this is just a numeric number entry field, so I will put in the number of grams I've used on this project. And then I just have a simple checkbox for where the project is complete, and I have this filtered, so where project complete checkbox is empty, it will show me. So this just means basically it keeps the view tidy, because you're going to have an entry in this table for each project and yarn pair that you're using. So you can see here I have, in the basketry cowl project, I'm using 4 different yarns and I have 4 rows in this table. So having this checkbox and just a filter, and you can also you can choose to keep it filtered. So yes, the Project Yarn tab is what we call the Junction table. So this is just a kind of a bit of additional admin that needs to be done in order to track individual quantities of individual yarn and project pairings. But there is a way that I've managed to automate keeping this table up to date, which we'll see in the next video I'm going to do. So if we go to the projects tab, we can see how this is actually the junction table is used in practice. First, so project yarn is a linked record. So this project yarn field is going to link to the project yarn table, and it allows linking to multiple records because, you know, if you're using multiple yarns in a particular project, then you need to link to all of the relevant records in project yarn. Then the quantity used lookup is going to look at what you've put in project yarn, and on those linked records it's going to go to the project yarn table and look up the number of grams used. So here, this is where it's going to list them. So here you can see I used one yarn and it's 159 grams of that yarn. Here I used 3 different yarns because there were 3 different colours in the socks, and I used 19 grams, 14 grams and 79 grams. Then the total yarn used is a formula that sums all of the values in here. So that's just kind of a total, you know, so you can see what the total amount of yarn used was in the project, but this is the one which is actually allowing us to track how much of each yarn we used. Then if we go back to the yarn in stash, so let me choose, for example, those far leg socks. In fact, if I filter a bit so we don't have to scroll so much. So you can see here I've got the 3 yarns in the 3 different colours that I used for this project. This is the linked field, which links back to projects. So linked fields are reciprocal, so every time you add one on one table that links to another table, you will find the field appears on the table that you just linked to. So here we have, you can see I used them in the socks project, and here you can see look up grams used in projects. It's also got a link to the project yarn table because the project yarn is linking in one column to projects and in the other column to yarn in stash. So that's the reciprocal column for that one. And the grams used in projects is again a lookup field that is going to look at what's in the project yarn column here and then go to the linked record in project yarn and pull through the number of grams used. So you can see that's pulling through the number of grams used, and then if we go back to total grams used, that's going to sum all of the values in grams used in projects. So this is necessary because if, for example, let me change, for example, this Wool and the Gang yarn that I've used in 2 projects, you can see here grams used in projects has value 1, value 2. So we need to sum those 2 values over here in total grams used, sums to 287, in order for remaining grams to calculate properly. Because it's going to take total grams and subtract total grams used. If we tried to use grams used in projects, this wouldn't work because it won't recognize the value, value format that we will have in total grams used, in grams used in projects, sorry. So that's why you kind of need to do it in two stages. We have the total grams used, which is summing everything which is in grams used in projects, which is our lookup field.